This study looked at the buffering role of slow-wave sleep at preventing disease. Carotid intima media thickness describes the thickness of the inner two layers of the carotid artery, and it serves as an accessible, reliably measured indicator of cardiovascular disease. The thicker the layer, the higher the risk. Exaggerated cardiovascular reactivity to laboratory-based acute psychological stress is associated with greater intima media thickness. In other words, stress causes measurable changes in cardiovascular activity that correlate with greater intima media thickness. So, it's reasonable to conclude that psychological stress increases the risk of cardiovascular disease. How does sleep interact with daytime disease processes to modify disease risk? We understand sleep to be a biobehavioral state characterized by observable cardiovascular changes. For instance, blood pressure declines during sleep, reaching its 24-hour minimum during slow-wave sleep. This aligns with the theory that sleep has restorative functions. It makes sense to speculate that individuals who have more slow-wave sleep will be able to better recover from stress-induced daytime cardiovascular reactivity. The investigators of this study hypothesized that the strength of relationship between cardiovascular reactivity and intima media thickness is weaker in individuals that have more slow-wave sleep and stronger in individuals that have less slow-wave sleep. A comprehensive cardiovascular assessment was performed in the morning after night 1 of a 2-night laboratory sleep study. The baseline investigation asked participants to count the number of times a colored square appeared on a computer screen. For the acute psychological stress task, participants were presented with 3 numbers, 2 of which were the same, 1 of which was different, and had to identify the different number by pressing it on the keyboard. The stress task was completed under 2 conditions. In the congruent condition, the different number aligned spatially with the button on the keyboard, whereas the incongruent condition, the different number was misaligned spatially with the button on the keyboard. The incongruency was intended to introduce psychological stress. Blood pressure and heart rate were measured in both the baseline and the stress tasks, and stress reactivity was defined to be the difference between those 2 measurements. Participants' sleep patterns were monitored the night following this stress task, and they were classified as either having low amounts of slow-wave sleep or high amounts. Each of these figures places cardiovascular reactivity, either diastolic blood pressure, systolic blood pressure, or heart rate on the x-axis, and places intima media thickness on the y-axis. In the low slow-wave sleep group, indicated by the solid black line, we see that greater reactivity is associated with higher intima media thickness values, which we can also demonstrate with the positive slopes of these graphs. Looking at figure C on the right, the correlation between heart rate and intima media thickness is strongly positive, whereas looking at figures A and B on the left, the correlation between blood pressure and intima media thickness is still positive but weaker. In contrast, in the high slow-wave sleep group, indicated by the dotted white line, we see that greater reactivity is associated with lower intima media thickness values, or a negative slope on these figures. Looking at figure C on the right, the correlation between heart rate and intima media thickness is strongly negative, whereas looking at figures A and B on the left, the correlation between blood pressure and intima media thickness is negative but weaker. This makes sense because if we agree that slow-wave sleep helps you to recover from stress, and you aren't fully recovering due to insufficient slow-wave sleep, you would expect that intima media thickness would be higher. Similarly, if you are recovering sufficiently due to high amounts of slow-wave sleep, then your body can respond to the stress and prevent it from damaging you. In conclusion, these results helped the investigators reach a conclusion that the quantity of slow-wave sleep does indeed moderate the relationship between psychological stress-induced cardiovascular reactivity and intima media thickness. Clearly, slow-wave sleep buffers stress-related cardiovascular disease risk, so it's desirable to get more slow-wave sleep.